we were shooting in the Angeles National Forest, despite all of our best efforts and stuff like that to make it really clear where everything was happening and, getting people there and coordinating everything. Someone got lost on their way to set. There was like a brief scene at the end that she was going to be in.
Yeah.
And she was supposed to play another character's mom, one of the child actors.
Yeah.
And she got lost, and there's no cell service, where we were. We had people like running around trying to find her, like driving all over like the mountains, trying to track her down.
How big was
And by the time we got to shooting her scene, and we rescheduled the day to try and get some other stuff done, hoping she'd show up, and she just never showed up.
Welcome to The Practical Filmmaker, an educational podcast brought to you by the Filmmaker Institute and Sunscreen Film Festival, where industry professionals talk nuts and bolts and the steps they took to find their success today. In this episode, producer Erik Harty explores owning your own entity as a commercial filmmaker, putting out spots for companies such as Bank of America, Budweiser, Champion, and Doritos. Find the full transcripts and more at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. I'm your host, Tanya Musgrave, and today we get to chat with executive producer of Long Division, a director-led commercial production company based out of LA who has done work for companies such as Bank of America, Budweiser, Champion, and Doritos. Welcome, Erik Harty.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
We're actually in the same space right now. We're sitting in this bomb theater room at like this Airbnb in Park City, Utah. A group of us were meeting up for Sundance, and then they canceled all of their in-person, and so the deposit had already been paid, so some of us met up anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we have the theater here, so
I know,
it's better than sitting at home and watching it on your laptop.
I know, right? So actually still being able to have that communal experience and watching something, but yet still online, oddly enough. So it is really cool. Yeah. Because they actually even said, because we saw Duel, right? Mm-hmm. And the filmmaker for that in the Q&A afterwards, he was just like, yeah, since all of the in-person had been canceled, Aaron Paul, like they had all just gotten together in Boise and just did the same thing.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But in any case, like in person, you cannot beat in-person conversation. So
totally.
It's been awesome. Like we had been chatting, and I had heard that you were into commercial film, headed up your own company. Mm-hmm. And since we're expanding our journey outside of traditional Hollywood model, I mean, like we still pull in, the stuff that everybody can relate to in that space as well. But, like we've dipped into commercial filmmaking in the ad space and, mm-hmm. that kind of a thing. So I was curious what it's like for those who head up their own entity. So thanks for indulging, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
But what has been your journey so far? Like, how'd you get to where you are now?
So I kind of got my start young. My dad had like a Hollywood background, like a Hollywood post-production background. And so I've kind of been around filmmaking my whole life in a variety of capacities. I didn't think it was going to be the thing for me, but long story short, I ended up going to film school. Thought I wanted to be a director. And for anyone who's gone to film school, so much of it is just making everyone else's projects. You kind of work on everything together, and through that process, I just realized that it was more creatively fulfilling for me to be in like a facilitating producer role than being the creative lead myself.
Yeah.
And so ended up leaving film school kind of more in that mindset and had the opportunity to build some relationships with some really fantastic directors. And at one point we were like, let's just take a crack at this and, see what we can make if we all band together and pool our resources and just give it a go.
So your dad had a background in Hollywood. I'm curious, kind of the dichotomy of that. I mean, I guess we had particularly touched on, I don't know, like how people end up in commercial filmmaking and, that kind of thing, because it seems to be, where some people prioritize certain filmmaking as like real filmmaking or what have you. And, I was just curious, like what that was like for you.
Yeah. In terms of like movie, TV filmmaking versus like commercial filmmaking, kind of like the artistic element behind that discussion. Yeah. So, I mean, when I was in film school, like I said, I thought I wanted to be, a director, and I was thinking like, short films, music videos, maybe that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, maybe at some point like feature films. And it was definitely kind of, instilled into my brain that like, that's like what filmmaking is like narrative stuff. And like what I'm doing now, I had no idea this like existed, what I do now when I was in film school.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was definitely kind of this attitude that like from a artistic, like, perspective, somehow people making commercials are like not really filmmakers. It's I don't know. It's like kind of a dirty word, like making commercials. You know, people would like
second rate.
joke about like where's like the creative fulfillment in like making a mayonnaise commercial or something like that. You know,
I mean, some people would find that a valid, like, oh yeah, I'm making mayonnaise, as opposed to like, at least it's a crappy indie, but it's mine. I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally get that, and there's definitely a lot of work out there that's not particularly boundary pushing from a creative perspective, not necessarily fulfilling. But I think the thing that like I realized in working with people who had more of a commercial background post like film school is there's so much creativity, storytelling, skills that go into making good commercials. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, especially nowadays, the type of commercials that we're seeing more and more of, that many of them have kind of at least a light narrative basis,
Yeah.
How do you tell a story in 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Like that's...
And it's hard because like, how they say like brevity is the soul of wit, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You don't have the time to come up with a 5-minute thing, but you can for a 40.
Right. I think everyone would be, just about any director I've ever met would be thrilled to get the opportunity to make like a feature-length film.
Yeah.
Narrative or fiction or documentary. But, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people I work with right now who I think would be pretty content, doing commercials for a while, if not their whole career.
Yeah.
And, it's a specific type of commercial. It's maybe not the mayonnaise commercial, but I don't know if there's a way that you could turn that into like a really like story-based approach to a mayonnaise commercial maybe, but
do you know Solomon Lectellum?
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel like a lot of the stuff that he does is very, very story-based.
Yeah, he's crazy.
Insane, right? He's kind of come up with this unique blend of using his cinematic storytelling in a very distinct commercial sense.
Yeah. Fortunately, I'd say right now more than ever, the ad industry is really receptive to, cinematic, kind of more traditional storytelling style approaches. Because, at the end of the day, like, there's just so much content that we consume every day. They're just constantly grasping at straws, looking for new ways to get people's attention. And the old, like, stereotypical boring commercial is, it's long gone. Nobody's going to notice that. They're just going to scroll right past,
Yeah, I've seen like, you're scrolling through Reels or TikTok and you're just like, what in the world? It's like this weird story that someone starts telling. And then by the end, I realized that it was advertising for a book. I was like, wait, what? Like they were telling the story of their book with, somebody's, half junky video. You know what I mean, though? They're just like, you think you're watching somebody's normal reel, and then you're just like, wait.
Yeah.
And
right.
So yeah, advertising in many manners of senses just look completely different now.
Right. And honestly, like, I think the biggest takeaway for me that really kind of catapulted my interest into commercial filmmaking is just that, that micro format storytelling. Like I said, how do you tell a story in 30 seconds? But I mean, right now, really the question is more, how do you tell a story in like 6 seconds, and I'm just very like fascinated with the skill set that's capable of doing that.
Yeah. So where did that transition take you? Like, as in the rubber meets the road kind of transition, once you figured out that you were headed in this commercial direction, what were your first steps?
It's kind of a stereotype. It was a bit of a windy road. There wasn't like a clear path per se, but one of my partners at Long Division, Alex Gilbert, he went to Art Center College of Design, which is a school in Pasadena that kind of has a commercial focus a little bit.
Okay.
The artistic quality of stuff that's made there, whether it's filmmaking, photography, design, it's all, it's incredible work.
Yeah. Top tier.
So again, like, commercial is not like a bad word in that sense, but like their focus seems to be on preparing artists like for the world of commerce and, training them as, really incredible artists, and then also preparing them for how to, make a living using their skill set.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the film program there has a pretty large emphasis on like getting into the commercial production world. And so he was just a lot more familiar with that. than I was. And he did some interning at a few production companies and stuff like that, and kind of got a chance to see into this like really niche world and how it works. We're not exactly sure how we're going to make it work, but like how do we find a way to like fund work that we want to make? And the solution was kind of like, well, what if we could make content that we're really interested in making, and someone else could pay for it and pay us to make it, you know?
The dream, obviously.
Yeah. And it was kind of like, well, you know, sounds like commercial filmmaking, commercial production.
Okay.
But there wasn't like a specific path to that.
Yeah.
And even from there forward, there wasn't really a specific path.
Really? That sounds like a story right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just kind of went out there and started hustling, I guess.
Yeah.
And basically talking to anyone and everyone that we could. And the kind of like repeat thing was we were always trying to make the project better than what was being asked of us, you know, and of course being respectful of whatever their need was. You know, we weren't going to like take the budget and do something they didn't ask for, you know, but like routinely, you know, we're investing time beyond what we're getting paid for, in some cases even money, to like take projects and make them look basically more expensive than they actually were to make.
Yeah.
And we kind of did that enough that it started to snowball into getting work that is actually at the scale that we were trying to make it look like.
Yeah. I would love to know how the conversation went when you guys first got your big gig. Like something that, like the name that you recognize, as in like, oh, hey, Doritos wants us to do a spot.
Yeah. Like our first big gig, if you will, or our first few big gigs weren't necessarily for like big name brands, but they were big in terms of the, you know, the budget and the scale and like the ask from the client.
Do you mind if I ask like what the budget was for your first big?
So our first, I mean, it's not big. It was big at the time, but like the first, I'd say, you know, the project that transitioned us out of being like a collective of filmmakers and into like a production company was a $32,000 job we did for a company called Western Dental and Orthodontics.
Okay.
And they basically just needed to step into kind of the digital campaign space. They hadn't really done much of that.
Yeah.
And that project was honestly a bit of a bumpy ride, which I mean is kind of to be expected given that it was a new scale for us. It's kind of a bummer. They ended up not actually airing the spots for a long list of reasons. But that I'd say was like one of our first big gigs from like a, you know, scale perspective. And that was just kind of like, it was like a, you know, switch flipped. And it was like, okay, suddenly like we're doing something real and big and like we just gotta go.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was really cool. It was really energizing. Yeah. Kind of realizing that we were stepping out of being like super scrappy and stepping into kind of a more organized workflow. And at that point, probably the biggest set we had run was maybe like 9 or 10 people. And then, you know, that project we're working with like 20, 25 people.
Wow.
So that was like a big change. And I think from then on, that was like a big turning point. Yeah. And even as like the brands and the agencies have gotten more recognizable in terms of, you know, who the names are, it I guess it just like doesn't phase us anymore. It just kind of like, it is what it is, you know, it's on to the next one kind of thing, you know? Yeah. And, you know, you kind of like, you wrap a project and you're like, wow, I just did like a champion spot. And then, you know, a week or two later, it starts like running on, you know, Instagram or whatever. And people are like sending it to you and like, hey, you guys made this, right? And that's really cool. And you kind of have this moment of like, you didn't even really think about it until then. And then it hits you and it's like, oh, wow. Yeah. Like, yeah, my friends are getting ads that I made, you know, and they're cool. You know? You're not like ashamed because they like suck or something, you know?
Like, oh, my friend made this. Yeah. I mean,
but I feel like there was like a scale turning point, and then like bigger name brands started to follow. But at that point, we were just like, just in the groove, and there was just momentum. And
and there's no more of that fear of just like, oh, is it okay that we charge this much? It's just like, this is the price and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think stepping out of school, there was definitely a lot of struggle around, you know, this is like a lot of money, and I'm kind of sheepish about like asking for this much,
Yeah.
But then, especially after that Western Dental job, it was just much easier to be like, look, to do what you need, we need this many people. It's just what it costs, and like, we need to make this much to support, going through all of the overhead processes to make that happen. And so it's, it's just kind of like, this is what it costs. And like, if that doesn't work, it's okay. We're not the right fit.
Yeah.
You can find someone else.
Yeah. And it's no longer a desperate scarcity mindset of nothing's ever going to come along kind of a thing. So how many are in your company now?
I mean, we're pretty small at the moment, and it's served us well, particularly during the pandemic, being small.
Yeah.
But the way we're structured, so there's me, and then I have two partners, Alex Gilbert and John Wong. They're also directors on our roster.
Okay.
We have 3 directors. 2 of them are partners, and one isn't a partner. But the way it works is I'm kind of like the full-time, and then the directors are working pretty frequently, but not technically full-time. And then we just scale up on a per project basis. And that's like a pretty common model for production companies, especially younger production companies these days.
Yeah.
Having a big full-time staff is very overhead intensive.
And it's very expensive.
And I mean, we'd like to get to a point where, we can be supporting that. And, companies that are, maybe a few tiers larger than us often do have a few more full-time staff. They'll have some office staff and maybe a line producer or 2 on staff to help with some of the like bidding process and just kind of like keeping the workflow consistent, from project to project. But that's kind of how it works at the moment, is we basically just scale up on a per project basis.
I filed for an LLC literally just this year. Just,
nice.
Just for, between like the podcast and, I'm producing now and, like I had photography and I'm not really doing that anymore. But, like these little legs that you need. I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, as a sole proprietor, you can kind of get by with, anywhere from, if you need to, like 35 to 70 or, whatever, like that kind of range of stuff. But, you still have other people who are worried about getting gigs. When you have like 3 of you and all of a sudden that 30 or 70 is not a lot. You divide that by 2, in your case 3, and then on down to your crew. How does life look like as of now, if we're diving into the financial weeds a bit here? What would someone expect, or what should someone expect if they wanted to start their own company? Even along those sides of like financial security and, tech salary versus like, are you salaried? That kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a tough thing. Like, I mean, to be really honest, this has been really fun and rewarding, but it's been super hard too.
Yeah.
It's a little difficult to answer because there's kind of a few ways that you can approach structuring things.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, staying a sole proprietor just kind of works, and you can have the added benefit of, having like an LLC as a sole proprietor, where you get a little bit of extra like liability protection and stuff like that. But in our case, we decided that we wanted to go after the portion of the market where the resources are the largest, and that's kind of in the traditional ad agency pipeline. But it's like a super niche thing. And so it's really hard to break into. The framework that I'm referring to is the traditional process, which is changing a lot right now, honestly. But the way that commercials have been made forever is, Coca-Cola decides they need to do some marketing, and so they go hire an ad agency. And the ad agency can provide a variety of services. They can help them do market research. They can help them come up with a strategy. Sometimes, especially nowadays, companies as big as Coca-Cola will do a lot of that in-house. But then, they work with the brand to develop a marketing strategy, and then the agency brings their creative team in, creative directors, art directors, copywriters, basically to take this marketing strategy and figure out how is this actually going to be executed? What are we actually going to do to serve this marketing strategy? A great example of, kind of some innovative work that those people will do is like, if you've ever noticed, most insurance companies make comedic commercials. And it's because at some point, a creative director or whatever decided like, some insurance company account was handed to them, and they were like, man, how am I going to sell insurance? I made the joke about it like a mayonnaise commercial, but honestly, like, what's more dry than like trying to sell insurance? You know what?
Yeah, right.
We're just going to not even really talk about kind of the nitty gritty like insurance offerings. Yeah. We're just going to be funny and memorable. That's kind of the work that like, the agency will do on the creative side. And then, they'll take like broad strokes things and really whittle it down to, creative briefs with like storyboards, scripts, oftentimes casting boards, things like that.
Yeah.
And they get all of that signed off with the brand. And, this process can take a really long time.
Yeah.
In some cases, like we're working on jobs that the agency creatives have been bouncing back and forth with the brand for like 9 months before we're talking to them.
Yeah.
But basically what ends up happening is, so the agency gets all of the creative locked, and then they need someone to then take their idea and actually make it happen.
Okay.
And that's where the production company comes into play.
Okay.
And more specifically, that's where like the commercial director comes into play.
All right.
Because kind of the way it works is there's so much talent out there right now, and so many production companies that are all more or less equally capable from like a production perspective, that really what like a commercial production company with a director roster, really what their business model is it's like part production capabilities and it's part like talent representation, really. Yeah. Because all of these companies, they have directors on their roster that are signed exclusively.
Okay.
And so,
all right.
The agency says, hey, I've got this puzzle that I've assembled and I'm missing one piece.
Yeah.
I need someone who like is a food director who knows how to use like motion control robots and has like a lot of like eggs in their portfolio. And they're like looking for this really granular piece that's like the perfect fit. And so like there's all these production companies clamoring to get this job, but like the person that's going to win the job is the one that has the portfolio that speaks like exactly to their need. So anyways, it's kind of long-winded, but that's like the traditional commercial model. And like I said, that's changing right now, but it's still where most of the money is and like where all of the really interesting commercial work is being made. Yeah. So that's like what we're chasing after.
Yeah. Like what this reminds me of was like, so BYU TV, they had Studio C under that, and they had a bunch of these actors that kind of went and made their own production company and that kind of thing. But man, I saw them each in these hilarious spots. Poopery was one of them. Lumi, the Fiber Fix, Zip Top. There's just like a bunch of them that that Studio C crew, they were improv people, and they kind of like branched out and started acting for all these things. Purple Mattress. That was another one.
Is that
like Goldilocks?
Is that wrapped up with the Harmon brothers?
Yes. Yes. That's what it is.
Those guys are crazy.
Right. But they're the ones that they're. If you want something really hilarious and witty and memorable about this really boring product that's like, yes, sell this one random thing, and they do an incredible job with it. Is that kind of what you were talking about, where like they're known for like that one thing, maybe not even like production value, I guess, but like their stuff looks awesome anyway. But
the Harmon brothers are actually a really interesting example. They're one of the companies that's actually kind of breaking the traditional model to some extent. Yeah. They don't have a roster of directors. They do have directors on staff. Okay. But that's not really what they're selling. Yeah. They're selling a new model of commercial filmmaking that's honestly gaining a lot of steam. Yeah. Budgets are shrinking, but like the overall content need has exploded. Yeah. Because it used to just be when you were making a commercial, you were just making the commercial for television. Yeah. But now you have an endless list of places where your ad needs to end up. But like I said, the budgets are shrinking despite the fact that the need is like skyrocketing.
Perfect.
The volume is skyrocketing.
It's the greatest situation ever.
So the Harmon brothers are interesting because they're an example of a really successful company that stepped in and said, hey, so I'm going to be a commercial video production company, and I'm going to have as many of these roles that you need to make something in-house full-time, which makes it cheaper than paying people on a per project basis. But then also what they bring to the table is they have like a couple creative directors, copywriters on staff as well. So essentially what they're offering is, hey, you client who needs some outside help for your marketing campaign or whatever, maybe you don't have millions of dollars to go hire an ad agency, but like if you do a little bit of like the market research and a little bit of the strategy internally with the people you already have on salaried, and then bring it to my team,
that's amazing.
And we have some creatives on staff, you could then essentially, so maybe you're still spending $500,000 on the commercials that you're making, but like instead of spending $10 million with an ad agency who then spends $500,000 to make the commercial, you're just going straight to the Harmon Brothers.
Cutting out the middleman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a new thing that's swooping in as well.
And it's genius.
Yeah, it is.
Really.
It is. But it's just different. And frankly, like, I mean, they do great work, but they're kind of in a specific niche for sure. Like a lot of their stuff is really funny, but the polish tends to be a little bit lower than, you know, some of the top tier production companies, you know, you can go to them and you can get Spike Jonze to direct your commercial or, you know, Ridley Scott or whatever. You know, obviously those people are on just like a whole nother level from like a craft and experience perspective.
And I imagine that their spots are incredibly clever, but not necessarily, you know, what you were saying, high production value. So what it makes me think of is it's really, really good for the people that are just there at the company, but not necessarily for creating the amount of commercial jobs that, like, for instance, an ad agency might bring in.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So, like, I wonder what would happen in that model. Like, if we just kind of like jump to the future, what would that even look like? Of, you know, if like everyone ended up going, hey, well, we can just skip the middleman. Right. Then what would that do? I mean, is that ultimately gonna hurt the? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, what would it be like if, you know, production companies, like as they are now, even like they're shrinking their budgets and like this sounds so horrible to say, but it's just like, is it undercutting the whole industry of just like, no, this is how it's been built. Like these freelancers can charge this much, and so maybe that's actually no, because like if the freelancers are able to put their foot down and say like, no, I am going to be working for this much, and you guys are just like, this is what it's going to take. Right. It's going to be cheaper than them, but this is what it's going to take to get it. If you want Spike Jonze, we can go and get Spike Jonze, but this is what it's going to take. Right. But it's still going to be cheaper than what an ad agency would bring.
Well, that's what it is it's not necessarily undercutting. It's just saying, I'm going to cut out a lot of the overhead.
Yeah.
So like the production still costs the same amount of money as it would have.
Yeah.
But like,
this is true.
You're not having to spend 10 million to then spend 500,000.
Yes, this is true. Oh my God. Like I feel like I just needed to, apparently I just needed to chew on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know,
it makes perfect sense. I take a long way around sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot if you're not, you know, this is kind of like my 24/7, but like if you're not familiar with the model and how things are changing, you know, it's kind of a lot. It's kind of convoluted, but
money's in commercials. So like, where's the hub where you guys mingle? Like, or is it just, you know, is it a Craigslist ad? Is it like staff me up, tell me film and TV jobs, that kind of thing? Or
I mean, there's kind of two answers to that question. If it's about just like crew, I mean, a lot of the folks that we work with, I mean, they're doing everything. They're doing commercials, they're doing music videos, they're doing TV, they're doing films. Yeah. And they kind of just bounce around, you know. Where it starts to get a little bit more nuanced is, especially with directors, but also even, you know, producers and ADs as well. Like that kind of stuff can start to get really, I mean, those folks can also bounce around, but like it's a whole different beast making a movie versus making a commercial. And honestly, there really isn't like a great hub. It's kind of just like this ethereal network that you just kind of have to like, you know, push your way into. I mean, the one thing I will say is like we as a company use a resource called Source, and it's basically a database of, it's not like exhaustive, but it tracks a good percentage of like the commercials that are made.
Ooh, interesting.
And you can go on and you can look at credits. You can find out who the agency was, who the production company was.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of expensive and really only makes sense if it's like the business you're in.
A company that's paying for it.
Yeah.
Is it like a subscription model kind of a thing?
Yeah.
How do you mind if I ask how much a month?
Yeah. So I mean, I know for a fact that we are on the cheapest like tier.
Yeah.
Because they basically price it according to your scale.
Okay.
So we're the cheapest option, and we're paying $225 a month.
Okay. All right.
But I know some
But
other
if it's
folks.
worth,
Yeah, I know there's another production company that is a little bit bigger than us, and they're paying like $1,000 a month.
Oh my gosh. I mean, is it kind of the difference between IMDb and Pro, where like, oh yeah, they have like these are the credits and their contact info, or
Yeah, I mean it's even bigger
difference?
than that, because like if you don't have it, you just have to like, if you see a commercial and you want to know who made it, you just kind of have to start digging. Because so like let's say you see a spot, you're like watching TV or whatever, or Hulu, whatever, an ad comes on, and you want to know who made it.
Yeah.
Like you can type in the ad and you might find it on the brand's YouTube channel, but like nobody gets credited in commercials.
No.
And so it can actually be pretty hard sometimes to just like, grassroots kind of like dig up information.
Really?
So with IMDb, where you can like kind of go and you can find out some baseline information,
Yeah.
and then like IMDb Pro, you can get more.
Yeah.
In terms of like the commercial space, it's kind of like the difference between having to spend hours looking or just like being able to look it up in a minute or two.
Wow. So it's basically the commercial IMDb.
Basically, yeah.
Nice.
But there's no free version.
Bummer. Well, I mean, if the money is in commercial, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask a bit about the tools of your trade. I know that you said that you kind of liked the producing side of things, but maybe there's some resources that kind of still go up your alley in that way. But what gear, gadget, or resource is an old reliable, something that you just kind of go back to and it's kind of like your fuzzy blanket, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, Google Drive.
Okay, yeah.
That's like the bread and butter. I mean, there's so many different productivity tools that we use, but like, I mean, Google Drive is just...
It's cheap. We ended up using it for...
I've been using it since high school, and it's just like second nature to me at this point.
Yeah.
You know.
What gear and gadget that has revolutionized the way you work, or resource along the lines of like what helps you run your company better?
We use things like Hot Budget and Point Zero for our budgeting, which are... Hot Budget's a plugin for Excel. It's like $50, so it's pretty cheap, but it's really helpful because it basically just condenses the budgeting process.
Yeah.
Like Movie Magic and Studio Binder. We use Studio Binder sometimes, but I feel like to some extent that is a little bit of a film and TV versus like commercial and music video difference.
Yeah.
No one I'm working with is using Movie Magic. Like it's like this huge, robust tool.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, like, even if I have 50 people on set, it's like 1, maybe 2 shoot days.
Yeah.
So, like, can we condense this somehow?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
So do you do that with Studio Binder then?
Sometimes, from like a budgeting perspective, I mean, we're usually using things, some of our producers, like people have their own preference, but a lot of times we're working with like Hot Budget or Point Zero. Sometimes Movie Magic still. And Hot Budget's great because it's just like an Excel plugin.
Really?
Yeah, it just kind of sets the budget up in a much more condensed way, kind of catered to like a commercial approach. And it's also set up so that you can essentially prep the budget for like an AICP bid form, which is like
I have no idea what that is.
So I always forget like what the acronym actually stands for. It's like American... I don't think it's Institute. It might be American Institute of Commercial Producers.
Okay.
But like all the big commercial production companies are all a part of this group. And it's basically like a collective that, like when some of the union labor negotiations have been going on, like the AICP is working with all these commercial production companies.
No, I know.
To work with
this.
the unions.
Yes. I know exactly what this is. I actually, we posted this in our stories from AICP.
Yeah.
The conclusions they had come to when it came to paying overtime specifically for commercial.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a group of all of the large commercial production companies. And they they have a lot of resources. And then also they've come together and standardized the bid form.
Okay.
So that essentially when you're competing against another production company and you're both bidding on a job for an agency, you know that like, now you may not have the same profit margin, possibly, but the actual like exact bid structure is the same because you're both using this standardized form. And stuff like Hot Budget is set up to basically just generate that exact form.
No, because like, there have been some things where you're just like, how am I How am I, do I like put this in a PDF format? Like, do I just like design my own really, and they're going to look at it in 1 second, know that you have no idea what you're actually doing.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And also, I mean, it's set up in an intentional way. It has all of the information that the agency needs to know.
Yeah.
Nowadays, agencies have like cost consultants.
Okay.
Who are basically there to help them know, like, is this company like BSing me? Is it actually this expensive to like put a horse on a boat for a day? It's like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Those folks, kind of insist on this standardized form so that they can be looking everything.
Would it work within Google Drive? Like their sheets?
No.
No?
No.
Not within sheets.
Specifically for Excel. Okay. And also like, you got to be careful about like which version of Excel you're on too.
No, poo. Yeah.
So sometimes people still prefer to work in Movie Magic.
Yeah.
And then we actually, for a while, we have basically like a custom Google Sheets bid form that we've created. That's what we use sometimes as well.
That's amazing.
I mean, I think if I was going to make a movie, I'd still use Movie Magic because it's just so much more robust.
Yeah, absolutely.
But stuff like Hot Budget has been developed kind of with the perspective that like, I don't want to be looking at 100 tabs. Yeah. For this when I really only need like 10. You need to know how to work with spreadsheets if you want to produce anything.
Yeah. I did hear that. From like one of the other, like the ad guy who's just like, spreadsheets. It's so true.
I mean, it's funny. I was having this conversation with another producer the other day, and he's like, I got into producing because I wanted to make cool stuff. And he's like, 10 years later, I realized that I'm basically just an accountant. Like there's so much work, so much time that just gets spent in spreadsheets. Yeah. And honestly, like Adobe Acrobat and things like that. Just working with paperwork and stuff like that. It's crazy. But I mean, you need to know how to work with spreadsheets and just like budgeting in general.
Yeah. I don't know. You reach an age where like that kind of stuff is actually really, I mean, when you're excited about a vacuum cleaner and like that kind of stuff, there comes an age where you're just like, actually, this is a pretty bomb spreadsheet. Like, does anybody see this? Yeah. This is awesome.
Well, and honestly, I mean, the stereotype is kind of to call something like an art form. And, I definitely recognize the difference between a storytelling skill set, a directing skill set, and producing skill set. But the people that are at the top of their game, even in whether it's, narrative features or music videos or commercials, like the stuff that they're making happen from a logistical perspective is quite often pretty mind-blowing. Like it kind of is like an art form. There's an AD I know who was like a CSI or something like that he was ADing, and like they ran out of money in like the last 3 episodes of the season. This guy basically worked with a couple of the producers, and like these 2 or 3 people found a way to make their last week of shooting happen in 12 hours. And they basically got everything. I think the director probably would have wanted a few more pieces. Yeah. But they ended up shooting like I think 3 episodes in like 12 or 16 hours or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And it's just like, I mean, that kind of stuff is really impressive. Yeah. It's like, it's an insane like skill set.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things going wrong, I would love to know a story of when something went wrong.
I mean, stuff always goes wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's the nature of being a producer. Like, if that was one thing that I learned, even just from the feature from the summer, if that was one thing that I learned, it was why, like, all these problems. And before it dawned on me that, like, my job is literally to deal with problems. And so, anyway, continue.
Yeah. Pretty much across the board, it's one of those roles that you're doing your job well if, like, you're invisible. To some extent, because I mean you're steering a sinking ship basically, and you're trying to get it to land before you all drown. Really is what it is, regardless of what type of content you're making. It's not just like getting there, but also getting there with a good end product. Still, it's not just about like finishing your feature. It's like you'd still like it to be good too. So weirdly enough, the pandemic has been a really good time for us. Like we've experienced some big growth during the pandemic. Yeah. We were shooting a spot for, it's out now so I can talk about this, but it was for, it was through the ad council for the Forest Service.
Okay.
We were shooting in the Angeles National Forest. And, despite all of our best efforts and stuff like that, to make it really clear where everything was happening and, getting people there and coordinating everything, someone got lost on their way to set. And like one of the key actors got lost on their way to set. There was like a brief scene at the end that she was going to be in.
Yeah.
And she was supposed to play another character's mom, one of the child actors.
Yeah.
And she got lost, and there's no cell service, where we were.
Oh, my stars.
And so we had people like running around trying to find her, like driving all over like the mountains, trying to track her down.
How big was
And by the time we got to shooting her scene, and we rescheduled the day to try and get some other stuff done, hoping she'd show up, and she just never showed up. We were talking to like the agency team, and it was like, this person isn't going to be here. Like, we've got to do something else. And, I was talking to the director, and we were kind of on a break and happened to notice that the child actor's actual mom looked not the same as our actual, actor, but fairly similar.
Yeah.
And I was like, we need to go see if they'd be okay. Like, if she'd be interested in doing that, because it wasn't like a speaking part or anything like that.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to just like be her mom in a scene or two? Well, we've got all the paperwork here if you're game and stuff like that. And they ended up, she was interested, and the agency and the brand were okay with it. And so we just like hot swapped, this child actor's mom.
Meanwhile, the real actress is like getting attacked by some wildebeest.
Yeah, I mean, she ended up being okay, but
that's good.
It's just one of those things where it's like, I mean, what do you like? Your actor isn't there. What do you do?
Yeah, seriously, what do you do?
Yeah.
Well,
it ended up working out fine, but it's definitely one of those like everything is falling apart. Moments,
It's fine. We're fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Well, we have a listener question from our Instagram at Practical Filmmaker.
Sweet.
Until you have a good enough portfolio that can demand the asking price of high-end clients, how do you create high-end product, especially when the product is so often client-driven?
I can definitely speak to that from a commercial filmmaking perspective, but I think what I have to say also applies to, any like sphere that you're working in. I mentioned earlier that like when we first started out, we were always pushing projects to look and feel bigger than they were. And we were fortunate that, we were in a position where we could put in a little extra time, or we maybe did have a little extra money to put into a project, or we had a good relationship with the client and we could kind of, nudge them in a direction that we thought was, interesting and good for them as well.
Yeah.
But really that's kind of like my main advice is just that, like, as much as possible, if you don't have the work, make the work that you want to be making as close as you can. You know? I mean, if you have $1,000, it's difficult to make something that looks like you had $100,000. But that like was our early success is like making things that seemed a lot bigger than they actually were. And at some point we had a big enough portfolio that it was like, oh, these people can do this. It's not like fake it till you make it kind of, but just making sure that whatever you're doing is like pushing your work forward as much as possible.
Yeah. It's almost like develop it while you make it. Like, if that makes sense. You're like knitting your parachute as you're falling.
Right.
But I mean, you're learning how to knit a parachute, if that makes sense.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is just like, if there's a specific thing you want to be making, whether it's like a style or a genre or a scale or both, you know, do your best to find a way to make something that looks like that.
Yeah.
Especially in like the commercial filmmaking space. It can be frustrating at times, but like clients and agencies are so risk averse, and they are spending a lot of money. So it makes sense, but they're so risk averse. They need to know that you can do exactly what they're asking. Yeah. And so the best way for them to know that you can do exactly what they're asking is for you to have the exact thing in your portfolio as close as possible.
Yeah.
And so, it's just about making the work you want to be making more of, really.
Yeah. In photography, if you wanted to do commercial photography and you saw a wedding featured on their site, it would be like absolutely no go. You know, when
Right,
you say that,
right.
you know, companies are looking at your stuff and your portfolio, I mean, what kind of stuff are you putting on there? Are you making sure that you have a night exterior as well as a car shot, or as well as a, you know, just what are some of the things that are included within your portfolio?
If you're trying to pitch on like a Geico brief and the agency producer sees that you have, you know, some like testimonial based 3-minute video you did for your college 7 years ago on your portfolio, I mean, that's going to be like a no-go. Even if you have
Yes.
something else in your portfolio that like
Yeah.
speaks to their need perfectly.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so there's definitely
That
that,
could hurt you.
element that exists as
Amazingly.
well. But honestly, it gets a lot more like nuanced than that. Like one of the biggest things that we started encountering early on, even when we were making stuff that looked like at a very large scale, we'd get feedback that like it didn't look like agency creative. Like the concept didn't feel like it would have actually come from an ad agency. Like it was maybe a little bit too conceptual or something like that.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, you know, we were very conscious of that kind of thing. But then also from there, you can kind of just hone in on like genres you want to be doing. Like within our portfolio right now, I mean, we have Alex Gilbert is like a really talented comedy director. That's kind of his background. And he's branched out from that a bit now. Just, I mean, because he's just a really incredible storyteller. And so he's done a small campaign for BetterHelp, which is like an online therapist platform. And, you know, we're basically just like little short films kind of showcasing different like mental health issues that people experience. And then we also just wrapped up like a 3-spot fashion campaign, you know. Another of our directors has like a really strong branded doc background, and another one is really into like sports and motion. And so you can kind of just like build up different genres, you know. There's just so many out there that you kind of have to pick and just kind of go down a path. But in terms of like trying to figure out some to go after, my advice would be just look at the commercials you're seeing. Someone sold that. We're going to do this. We can do this. And someone's like, okay, like I'm going to pay for that. You know? So look at what's being made and see if there's anything you're interested in making, and then, you know, go after that.
Yeah. So what questions should I have asked you?
For me, like I mentioned, when I was in film school, like what I'm doing now, I had no idea existed. You know, I would see commercials, but I didn't really know how they were made and what the process was like. And I think it's such a niche space, and there still are a lot of like closed doors that you can't really see into very well, especially at like the higher tiers.
Yeah.
That like, for me anyways, like if I was in film school listening to this, I would have been really interested to learn what like the like model is for commercials.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like I was saying, you know, brand hires ad agency hires production company because of a specific director that they have on their roster.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think if there's a question, that would have been it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like we covered some good ground.
Did we go over like how like comfortable you guys are at like the three of you, you know, like supporting yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be really transparent about that, I mean, we're a young company. We've been working together, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years now.
Yeah.
But Long Division as an entity is 2.5 years old now.
Okay.
And so I'd say we've been doing it in a very serious professional capacity for about 2.5 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're still in like the growth mindset, you know. Like I said, just to be really transparent, you know, Long Division isn't a profitable venture yet. We're keeping ourselves fed and everything, keeping ourselves sustained. But like, you know, ideally we'd get it to a place where like, you know, we're all getting paid, but then also like, you know, we're profiting from the company. Because again, like you said, like it's where all the money's at. And I mean, there are a lot of people who work in commercials who are making bank.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And for the three of us, I mean, that's not really the focus. Again, the focus is like, we want to be where the most resources are to make the coolest stuff, the most engaging stuff.
Yeah.
And then we also happen to know that like, if we can do that sustainably, it'll keep us all fed and happy, and, you know, allow us to do whatever it is we want to do with our lives outside of filmmaking.
Yeah.
But right now we're still in like growth mindset. And so basically everything the company is doing and making money on is just getting put back into growing and getting bigger and better.
Got you. So do you all have like other full-time jobs that you like sustain, or is it just the grind?
Yeah, it's just the grind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really for me, I mean, it keeps me busy 5 days a week. For, the guys on our roster, they're basically making money on a per project basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, even now, like we're working with budgets where being the director on a project can pay quite well.
Yeah.
It's just like the key thing is like getting to a place where that scale of work is so frequent that you're busy all the time.
Yeah.
And for the folks on our roster, we're not there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious too.
And some people never get there. Even at some of the big production companies, you'll hear of a director going somewhere really large like Stink Films or Anonymous Content. And, I was listening to a podcast the other day and this guy was talking about how he was at one of those companies and, he made 200 treatments over the course of a year and landed one job.
Dang.
And decided that it wasn't for him.
There's a saying that I always love where it's just like, I frankly don't make much of a living, but I make a hell of a life. You know what I mean? And because if you're doing something that you love and you're fed,
right.
I mean, that speaks to the artist side of you that's just like, screw it all, number one. But I was curious too, you had mentioned that, it's not that big of a thing. It was at $32K, right? That's pretty big to some other people. I mean, and most beginners who come in and they see like, oh, he's done spots for Doritos and like Champion and all this stuff. And, they might hear this particular part and just be like, what does that mean for me? Like, so what actual bracket are you in now of creating these particular spots? Because like, I think there's also something to be said about like, oh yeah, this is all going back into the company, but we're doing all right. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, at the moment we are most frequently working in the 50 to 250K space. Yeah. And
that's like a pretty big space for me. I mean, for a 30-second spot, I feel like that's pretty freaking sweet.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. I mean, on the flip side though, like you'd be shocked how quickly that disappears.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of insane.
I know.
Yeah. But I mean, at this point, like 50 is kind of on the low end and it's typically for fairly small, minimal projects. But like we produce at such a scale right now that like I just can't do anything for $10,000. Like I can't even get a crew out for a day.
Yeah.
For that kind of money. And it's tough sometimes because we talk to people that really want to work with us and you kind of have to have that conversation sometimes that like the scale just might not make sense for your need. Again, like people can hear like, oh wow, you made something for $200,000. Like that's so much money, and it's like, but most of it gets spent on just making it, like it sounds like, oh wow, you must be rich. And it's like, no, like it's just like making something is just so expensive. Yeah. Especially when what you're doing requires a lot of people to do it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a community aspect, which is why we like to promote the community as much as we can. Yeah. So how do those community members find you or follow your work?
I mean, you can look me up on LinkedIn, Erik Harty. It's Erik with a ERIK. Yeah. You can also check out our website, longdivision.film, FILM. Nice. Follow us on Instagram, all that good stuff. We'd love to hear from people. Yeah. Always looking to meet new folks, new collaborators.
Absolutely. Man, this has been great. Like seeing the different options out there, like options that suit filmmakers who like prefer regular income, like that kind of a thing or anything, like your insight has been like just, I don't know, extremely valuable. So thank you.
Good. Yeah. One last little thing I'll tack onto that too is just that like, I mean, it's great having more steady income, but I think the biggest thing I learned, looking back, the biggest thing like I would tell myself in film school is that we've actually found a way to do this and it be really creatively fulfilling too. It's not like you have to choose between like being a starving artist trying to get your film off the ground or like working in commercials and making money. Like there is a sweet spot to be found, I think, where you can do both. So
that's awesome. Oh, so cool. If you enjoyed this interview, follow us right here and on Instagram, ask us questions, and check out more episodes at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. Be well and God bless. We'll see you next time on The Practical Filmmaker.